I always thought losing my father would be the hardest part of my life, but I was wrong. The real pain came later, sitting in a polished conference room with beige walls, cold leather chairs, and my stepmother's voice slicing through the room like a blade. I never expected to walk into that will reading and be told that my father left everything to his real children. I never expected to sit there while Pamela smirked and my half-siblings laughed as if they had been waiting years for this moment. And I never, not in a million years, expected my 7-year-old daughter to be the one who would stand up, steady her little shoulders, and say, "Grandpa gave me a second will last month. He said to show it if anyone called Mom that word. Can I?" That was the moment the lawyer's hand trembled. That was the moment every expression in the room changed. But before we reached that shocking silence, everything started with humiliation, anger, and a lifetime of being treated as an outsider. My name is Avery Collins. I'm 34 years old, a single mother, and the eldest child of the late Richard Collins. My father remarried when I was 13, and my stepmother, Pamela, made sure every day of my life after that reminded me that I didn't belong. She never yelled, never physically pushed, but her words worked like sharpened glass. She would smile in front of my father, then whisper in my ear the moment he left the room, "Your mother left because you ruined her life." She fed lies like poison until my father slowly drifted from me. Pamela had 2 children from a previous marriage who became my half-siblings in name only. Caleb, now 31, carries himself with the smug confidence of someone who has been told his whole life that he deserves more than he earns. Lindsay, 27, follows Pamela's tone like a shadow, never thinking for herself but always ready to mock someone else's pain. The 3 of them formed a closed circle that I never broke into. I spent my teenage years watching my place in the family shrink while they grew louder, closer, and more entitled. I tried to stay connected to my father, but Pamela always found a way to wedge herself between us. Missed holidays became normal. Voicemails went unreturned. Eventually, I learned to accept the scraps of attention he offered, believing that if I didn't cling to them, I'd lose him completely. But when I had my daughter, Lila, something softened in him. He loved her quietly, almost secretly, the way a man loves something he is afraid to lose again. He visited when Pamela traveled. He sent cards addressed only to her. He read to her for hours when she was little, running his fingers over her curls, whispering that she reminded him of everything good he once had. And maybe that guilt led him to the moment last month when he visited me out of the blue. He hugged me longer than he ever had, told me he was proud of the mother I'd become, and spent the afternoon drawing pictures and laughing with Lila. Before he left, he handed her a sealed envelope. She tucked it into her little pink backpack as if it were treasure. None of us knew then how important that moment would be. When we walked into the law office the day of the will reading, I felt out of place. The room was filled with framed certificates, dark wooden cabinets, and a large table that smelled faintly of old leather and lemon polish. Pamela sat at the head like she owned the air we breathed. Caleb lounged back with arrogance. Lindsay tapped her manicured nails on the table as though she were bored. My daughter sat beside me, swinging her legs, unaware that grown-ups sometimes draw blood without touching anyone. The lawyer, Jonathan Hale, a man who had known my father for decades, adjusted his glasses and opened a folder. His voice was steady until he reached the line that slapped me across the face. "Mr. Richard Collins leaves his entire estate to his real children." Pamela leaned back with triumph. Caleb snorted. Lindsay let out a small, gleeful laugh. Then Pamela said the words she had waited years to say, "Finally, the bastard gets nothing." The room moved without me. My heart hammered. Shame drenched me. But before I could speak, a small voice rose beside me. Lila stood. Her hands were shaking, but her chin was lifted. "Grandpa gave me a second will last month," she said. "He told me to show it if anyone called Mom that word. Can I?" That was the moment everything stopped. That was the moment the lawyer's hand trembled. That was the moment my life split into a before and an after. Before the will reading, before the humiliation, before my daughter stood up in front of grown adults who should have known better, the days leading into that moment felt heavy, with a kind of sadness I couldn't put into words. My father had passed away only 2 weeks earlier, and grief sat inside me like a stone I kept swallowing over and over. But even with everything he and I had gone through, even after years of being treated like an afterthought, I still felt the kind of ache only a child feels when a parent is gone. Losing him meant losing the chance to ever fix what had been broken. When the letter arrived from my father's attorney asking me to attend the will reading, my hands trembled as I held it. A part of me hoped that maybe at the end of his life my father had remembered me. Maybe he'd written something, a letter, a message, anything that showed he understood the distance between us. I didn't hope for money. I didn't expect an inheritance. I only wanted confirmation that I mattered to him in a way Pamela had tried to erase. The morning of the will reading, I stood in my small kitchen pouring cereal for my daughter. Lila sat at the table kicking her feet gently against the chair legs as she hummed a song from school. She wore a yellow dress because she said it made her feel bright inside, and I silently wished could borrow some of her sunshine. "Mom," she asked, "is today going to be sad?" I hesitated. "It might be," I said, "but I'll be okay, and you'll be right next to me." She nodded with a seriousness only children carry. Then she reached into her backpack, checked something quietly, and zipped it back up. I didn't know then that she was checking the sealed envelope my father had given her a month earlier. I only thought she was making sure her crayons were still there. When we arrived at the law office, the air felt cold and distant. The building was tall, glass-fronted, and silent in a way that made footsteps echo. I held Lila's hand as we walked inside, and she squeezed back, sensing more than I explained. The receptionist offered a polite smile as she led us to a conference room. The moment she opened the door, every piece of hope inside me shrank. Pamela was already seated at the head of the long polished table, wearing a charcoal blazer and a smug expression she didn't bother to hide. Her hair was pinned back tightly as if she were preparing for a battle she fully expected to win. My half-brother Caleb leaned back in his chair, grinning like he couldn't wait for the show to start. Lindsay tapped her phone rapidly, not even pretending to be respectful. As soon as Pamela saw me, her smile curved into something sharp. "Avery," she said, stretching my name into something uncomfortable. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I kept my voice calm. "Your message said I was required to attend." She shrugged. "Required, I suppose. Expected? Not really." Caleb snorted under his breath. Lindsay smirked without looking up. I sat down beside Lila. She slid her hand into mine, grounding me. Attorney Jonathan Hale entered a moment later. He was an older man, silver hair, calm eyes, and a gentleness that made me think he remembered me from the years when my father still brought me around. He greeted Pamela first, then Caleb and Lindsay, and finally turned to me. "Ms. Collins," he said with a respectful nod, "I'm glad you came." His tone was enough to remind me that not everyone saw me the way Pamela did. As he organized the folders on the table, I scanned the room. On the wall hung photos of legal achievements, certificates, and framed letters. On the side table was a pitcher of water, untouched. Everything felt too neat, too perfect, as if nothing messy or cruel could happen there. But it was exactly the place where my life would unravel before it came together again. Lila swung her legs quietly and whispered, "That man looks nice." "He is," I whispered back. "He knew Grandpa for a long time." "What about them?" she asked, glancing toward Pamela and the others. "They're family," I said softly, though the word felt heavy. "Just not the kind that knows how to be kind." Pamela overheard and let out a low, arrogant laugh. "Still dramatic, I see." Mr. Hale cleared his throat, signaling for silence. Everyone settled, though Pamela made sure her victorious posture stayed visible. The room went still. There was a sense of ceremony, a quiet tension, the unmistakable feeling that what happened next would change something. Either everything or nothing at all. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses, opened the first folder, and prepared to read aloud. In that moment, I inhaled deeply and told myself to brace for disappointment. I didn't expect kindness. I didn't expect fairness. I expected Pamela's version of the story to win again. What I didn't expect was for the truth to already be sitting 3 inches away from me in a small pink backpack, waiting for someone to call me a name I had heard too many times before, and I had no idea it would be my daughter who would pull the first thread that unraveled all of Pamela's carefully woven lies. The conference room grew still as Attorney Jonathan Hale opened the folder containing my father's will. A faint rustle of paper echoed louder than it should have. It felt like every breath in the room paused. Pamela sat poised, chin high, as if she were preparing for a coronation rather than a legal reading. Caleb's hands were folded behind his head in a lazy stretch, and Lindsay leaned forward eagerly, phone turned face down, as if ready to record reactions once hers were the right kind. I felt my stomach tighten. I had prepared myself for disappointment, but I still hoped my father had left something, some message, even a single sentence acknowledging me. Something that told me he saw me. Not the outsider. Pamela insisted I was. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses and began to read. According to the document before me, dated 18 months ago, Mr. Richard Collins leaves the entirety of his estate to his real children. The words struck like a physical blow. Real children. Pamela gasped a theatrical sigh of relief, clutching her hands dramatically over her chest. "Finally," she said, loud enough so Mr. Hale couldn't pretend he didn't hear. "That chapter is closed." Caleb smirked, giving Lindsay a look that said he knew this outcome all along. Lindsay's smile was thinner but satisfied. She whispered, "This is going to be so awkward for her," as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away. I stayed silent, my throat too tight for words. My heart sank not because of the money, never because of the money, but because of the wording. Real children. As if I had been a mistake all my life. As if I hadn't spent years trying to earn something I never should have had to earn. Mr. Hale continued reading, but his voice sounded distant, drowned by Pamela's self-satisfied exhale. She shifted her posture, crossing one leg over the other, settling in as though everything finally made sense again. When he finished reviewing the primary will, he looked up at me with something like regret in his eyes. That expression alone told me that the rest of the document held nothing for me. I nodded politely, pretending I was fine, pretending I hadn't just been erased. I began gathering my things quietly, planning to slip out before more condescending comments could be made. It wasn't worth staying. I'd survived worse moments from Pamela. I could survive this. But just as I placed a hand on the strap of my purse, Pamela leaned in with the same venom I'd heard my entire teenage life. "The bastard gets nothing," she said with a satisfied smirk, like it should have been from the start. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb burst out laughing, loud and unrestrained. Lindsay pressed her hand over her mouth, unsuccessfully stifling a snicker. Pamela watched me with a smirk that widened every second I didn't respond. My daughter's hand tightened around mine. Lila's legs stopped swinging. She looked up at me with wide eyes filled with confusion and hurt. She knew that word. She knew it wasn't just mean. She knew it was a wound that never fully healed. I swallowed the sting as best I could. "Come on," I whispered to her. "We're leaving." But before I could take a single step, Lila slid out of her chair. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stood there facing the adults who had just mocked her mother. Her small shoulders squared. Her chest rose in a nervous breath. Her fists clenched at her sides. Pamela frowned. "Sit down. This isn't playtime." Lila didn't move. "Sweetheart," I whispered, reaching for her hand. "It's okay. Let's go." But Lila stepped forward instead. Her voice trembled, but her determination did not. "Grandpa told me he hated when people called Mom that word," she said. "He gave me something. He said to show it if anyone did it again." The room snapped to silence. Caleb stopped laughing mid-breath. Lindsay froze with her phone half-turned. Pamela's smugness flickered, then cracked. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses, clearly startled. "Lila," he said gently, "what are you talking about?" Lila reached for her backpack, the little pink one with glitter stars on the front, and unzipped it carefully. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She pulled out a sealed envelope with my father's handwriting on it, then held it up with both hands. "This," she said. "He told me to keep it safe. He said it was really important. He said the truth was in here." Pamela lunged halfway across the table. "Give that to me." I stepped between them, adrenaline sharpening my voice. "Don't touch my daughter." Pamela drew back, surprised not by the words, but by the certainty behind them. Lila stepped closer to Mr. Hale and extended the envelope upward. He hesitated for a moment, then accepted it with a care that made the entire room still. For the first time since I walked in, the balance shifted. Lila had moved the story forward with one brave action, and everyone in the room knew it. The moment Lila handed the sealed envelope to Mr. Hale, the entire atmosphere in the conference room shifted. It felt as if the air thickened, like the room itself was holding its breath. Mr. Hale accepted the envelope with both hands, his brows knitting together as he examined the familiar handwriting on the front. Caleb leaned forward, suddenly alert. Lindsay's fingers hovered over her phone again, unsure whether to record or retreat. Pamela stiffened in her chair, forcing a tight smile that didn't hide the panic flickering in her eyes. "What is that?" she demanded. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she's holding." She attempted a laugh, but it came out brittle and strained. Mr. Hale didn't respond to her. He continued examining the envelope, running his thumb along the sealed flap as if confirming its authenticity. Then he looked up at me with a gaze so serious it almost frightened me. "Avery," he said gently, "do you know anything about this?" My voice barely worked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "My father visited last month. I knew he spent time alone with Lila, but I didn't know he gave her anything." Lila stepped closer to me and slipped her hand into mine. She looked at the attorney with careful sincerity. "Grandpa said grown-ups forget what's real when they're scared," she whispered. "He said I had to keep this safe until the right time." Pamela scoffed loudly. "You're letting a child interrupt a legal proceeding? This is ridiculous. That envelope could have anything in it. Crayons, a drawing, a grocery list." But there was a nervous tremor beneath her sarcasm. She wasn't mocking out of amusement. She was mocking out of fear. Mr. Hale raised a hand calmly and Pamela fell silent, though her foot tapped anxiously under the table. "I have known Richard Collins for over 30 years, Mr. Hale said in a steady, controlled tone. "I know his handwriting, I know his habits, and I know he would never place a sealed envelope in his granddaughter's care without a reason." He carefully broke the seal. I felt Lila squeeze my fingers, her palm damp with nervousness. I knelt beside her, whispering, "It's okay. You did the right thing." She nodded, though her lips trembled slightly. "Grandpa said the truth matters." While Mr. Hale unfolded the documents, Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Dad already had a will. It was read. This is done." Lindsay shook her head slowly. "Maybe it's nothing. Maybe he just wrote something sentimental." But I saw it in her expression. She didn't believe the words even as she spoke them. Pamela, meanwhile, leaned forward with thinly veiled hostility. "If that's a letter, it's irrelevant. If it's an old draft, it's irrelevant. If it's anything other than a notarized legal document, it's irrelevant." Her voice cracked at the last irrelevant. Mr. Hale didn't flinch. He kept reading silently, page after page, his expression shifting from surprise to concentration, then something like solemn recognition. When he lowered the papers, his hand trembled slightly. "What?" Pamela demanded. "What is it?" He looked at her, then at Caleb, then Lindsay, and finally at me. His voice softened. "This is significant." Pamela's face paled. "You can't be serious." He ignored her. "This document is dated last month. It has a notary seal from my office. It contains signatures from 2 witnesses who are on staff here, and it revokes all previous wills." Lindsay gasped. Caleb's mouth dropped open. I felt my breath leave my body, not from excitement or relief, but from disbelief. My father, revoking the old will, making something new and secret, entrusting it to my child? Pamela slammed her palm against the table. "This is a setup. She pointed sharply at me, has been feeding lies to that child for years. She manipulated this. I want that document examined." Mr. Hale turned to her with a calm so sharp it cut through her rant. "Pamela, sit down." She did, more out of shock than obedience. He turned to me. "Avery, your father intended for this to be found, and your daughter honored his instructions." The room went silent again. Slowly the scales were tipping. The years of manipulation, the lies Pamela constructed around my father, the bitterness she fed him, all of it began to unravel the moment Lila stood up. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in that room. I didn't feel disposable. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt seen. Not because of money, not because of a will, but because my daughter believed in the truth enough to speak up when I was too bruised to fight back. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "No matter what happens next, I'm proud of you." She leaned her head against my arm and whispered back, "Grandpa said you needed someone to protect you." The turning point wasn't just the envelope. It was the realization that my father, in his final days, had recognized the harm Pamela had caused and chosen to make his own truth known. And the person brave enough to bring that truth to light wasn't me. It was my daughter. The room felt charged, like a storm was gathering, but no one could predict exactly where the lightning would strike. Pamela sat rigidly, both hands clenched together on the table so tightly that her knuckles blanched white. Caleb's confident posture had melted into confusion. Lindsay had gone entirely still, her phone forgotten in her lap. And in the center of it all, Attorney Jonathan Hale held the newly discovered will with a reverence that made the moment feel almost sacred. He cleared his throat. "I am going to read the document aloud, exactly as written and witnessed." Pamela leaned forward. "This is outrageous. Richard would never hide something like that. This has to be an old—" "Pamela," Mr. Hale said firmly, "be quiet." She froze, stunned by the authority in his voice. He unfolded the first page, smoothing it carefully. Then he began, "I, Richard Collins, of sound mind and aware of the harm I have allowed to persist in my family, hereby revoke all prior wills and testaments." Caleb's jaw dropped. Lindsay whispered, "No way," under her breath. Mr. Hale continued, "I regret the years I let others distort my relationship with my daughter, Avery Collins. She has suffered more than she deserved, not because of her actions, but because I failed to stand up for her against manipulation and cruelty." A tremor moved through my chest. I blinked hard, fighting tears, unsure whether to feel vindicated or heartbroken by his late realization. Lila squeezed my hand and leaned her head into my arm. Mr. Hale kept reading. "Pamela, though my wife, has contributed to this suffering by encouraging a divide between me and Avery. For this, I cannot in good conscience leave my legacy in the hands of those who thrived on that divide." Pamela gasped. "He didn't write that. He would never blame me." Mr. Hale ignored her and continued with controlled precision. "Therefore, I leave the entirety of my estate, assets, properties, and accounts to my daughter, Avery Collins, and to my granddaughter, Lila Collins." The silence that followed was so deep it felt like the whole room inhaled at once. Then the explosion began. Pamela shot out of her chair, palms slamming onto the table. "This is a fraud, a complete fraud!" Her voice cracked, shrill with desperation. "Richard was confused, manipulated, emotional. This is ridiculous. I want that document tested, verified, examined. This is not real." Caleb stood too, shaking his head violently. "Dad wouldn't change everything without telling us. He wouldn't just cut us off. He wouldn't trust—" He pointed sharply at me, her. Lindsay looked between them helplessly, tears pooling in her eyes. Not for my father, not for injustice, but because her imagined future suddenly vanished. Mr. Hale held up a hand, commanding silence. "The notary seal is genuine. The signatures of witnesses are genuine. I personally oversaw the signing. Richard was clear, rational, and intentional." Pamela blinked in shock. You knew about this?" He nodded. "Richard asked me not to tell anyone. He feared retaliation. He feared pressure. And he feared that the people around him," he looked directly at Pamela, "would do exactly what you are doing right now." Her face reddened with fury. "This is betrayal." "No," Mr. Hale said firmly. "This is accountability." Caleb took a step back, collapsing into his chair with a loud thud. Lindsay covered her face, whispering, "This can't be real. It can't be real." I stood frozen in place. I had spent years wishing my father would stand up for me. Years wishing he would see the way I was treated. Years thinking he didn't care. But he did. He just acted too late to tell me himself. Lila tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "Grandpa wasn't lying." My throat tightened. "No, sweetheart," I whispered back. "He wasn't." Pamela took a shaky breath and pointed at Lila. "This is her fault. That little girl—" Before she could finish, I stepped between them. "Do not speak to my child like that." For the first time in my life, Pamela stepped back from me. Mr. Hale continued reading the last paragraph. I hope this final action brings my daughter peace and reminds her that she was always my real child, even when I was too weak to say it. My knees nearly buckled. Lila wrapped both arms around my waist, holding me tightly. Pamela stared at the document, looking as if every piece of power she'd built over decades had been ripped from her hands. Caleb looked lost. Lindsay wiped mascara streaks from her cheeks. And I stood there, not triumphant, not vengeful, but overwhelmed with a sense of relief so deep it made me dizzy. My father had finally chosen me. It didn't erase the past, but it mattered. It mattered more than I ever realized. The room didn't feel like the same place anymore. A few minutes earlier, it had been a space where Pamela controlled the tone, where Caleb and Lindsay laughed without consequence, where I sat quietly swallowing the same humiliation I'd endured since adolescence. But with my father's final will now read into the record, the balance shifted so dramatically it felt as if gravity itself had changed. Pamela was the first to break the silence. She took a step back from the table, her chest rising and falling in furious, uneven breaths. Her voice, usually sharp enough to cut through steel, came out strained. "This is madness," she whispered. "All of it. Madness." Mr. Hale closed the folder containing the new will and slid it directly in front of him, anchoring the moment. "The document is legitimate," he said calmly. Richard's intentions were clear. He wanted his estate to go to Avery and Lila. Legally and ethically, that stands. Caleb looked at Pamela as though waiting for instructions, but she had none. The air of authority she had worn like a crown completely evaporated. Her face twisted with disbelief, but beneath it, I saw something I had never seen on her before. Fear. Real fear. She was terrified because this time, she had no control. Lindsay wiped tears from her cheeks, her makeup smearing. "So what?" she muttered. "We get nothing? Nothing at all?" Her voice shook with the disbelief of someone who had never considered that entitlement wasn't the same thing as inheritance. "Your father made his choice," Mr. Hale replied. Pamela spun toward me, her voice cracking. "You did this. You manipulated him. You turned him against his real family." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "He was always my real family," I said to her. "You were just loud enough to drown that out for a while." Her eyes flashed with rage, but before she could respond, Lila stepped forward. She stood between us, small but steady. "Grandpa didn't want people to be mean anymore," she said softly. "He said Mom was the most real thing he ever made." Pamela flinched as if the words knocked something loose inside her. Mr. Hale stood, gathering the documents. The meeting was officially over. "I'll be in touch with the next steps," he said. "Avery, I'll walk you out." Pamela didn't move. Caleb sank deeper into his chair, avoiding eye contact. Lindsay muttered something about calling a lawyer, though the tremor in her voice made it clear she didn't believe any attorney could undo what was legally locked in place. As I walked toward the door with Lila's hand in mine, Pamela called after me. "This isn't finished." I stopped, turned halfway, and met her gaze. "For you," I said quietly, "it should have been finished years ago. You just never let it end." Her mouth tightened, but she didn't follow us. She stayed rooted in place like someone watching a version of her life crumble in real time. Outside the conference room, the hallway felt lighter, brighter even. Not because the fluorescent lights were any different, but because I felt like I was breathing clean air for the first time in years. Mr. Hale paused beside us and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Your father loved you, Avery," he said. "I watched him struggle with his guilt for decades. What he did, was his way of trying to repair what should never have been broken." My voice wavered. "I wish he had told me." "He did," he said. "Just not with words. Sometimes people apologize the only way they know how." When he walked away, I knelt down in front of my daughter. Lila brushed her thumb over my cheek, wiping a tear I didn't realize had fallen. "You were really brave," I told her. She shook her head. "You're brave too. You just forgot for a little while." I hugged her tightly, my entire body trembling from the storm of emotions: relief, sadness, gratitude, grief. Lila held me with both arms, steady and warm. As we walked toward the parking lot, she looked up at me and smiled. "Grandpa's happy now. He said people rest better when the truth wins." I laughed softly through another tear. "He said that?" She nodded with full confidence. "He told me lots of things." I took her hand again and looked ahead, feeling more grounded than I had in years. The inheritance didn't change who I was. It didn't erase the years of being pushed aside, ignored, or insulted. But it did something unexpected. It validated the part of me that had always wondered if I deserved better. And maybe that was the point. My father's final act wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement, about love, about choosing the daughter he had failed to protect for too long. As we reached the car, Lila tugged my hand once more. "Mom," she said softly, "Grandpa chose you, and I choose you every day." That was the real legacy. Not the estate, not the assets, but the truth that finally broke through the lies, and the little girl who made sure it did. When I look back on that day in the attorney's office, I realize it wasn't about winning or getting anything. It was about reclaiming something I thought I had lost forever, my worth. For years, I let other people's voices define who I was. I let their cruelty shape the way I saw myself. But in the end, the truth found a way through the noise. It came in the form of a 7-year-old girl with more courage than the rest of us combined. Lila reminded me that love, real love, speaks even after someone is gone. My father may not have been perfect, and he may have waited too long to make things right, but he did what he could in the time he had left. And his final act didn't just change a legal document, it changed the way I carried his memory. Walking out of that building, with my daughter's small hand in mine, I realized the inheritance wasn't the money or the property. The gift he left us was clarity, peace. A line drawn in the sand that finally separated truth from manipulation. I hope this story reminds you that silence doesn't mean weakness, and being overlooked doesn't make you invisible. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who fear your strength, and sometimes the courage you need is standing right beside you, wearing a yellow dress and holding your hand tighter than anyone else ever has. Thank you for watching and sharing this moment with me. If this story touched you or made you think, please like the video, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more people who might need them. And remember, truth always finds its way home.